Good morning. I'm going to wait a few more minutes, not minutes, maybe 30 more seconds and make sure everyone is connected, and then we'll get started. All right, good morning. It looks to me like everyone is here and connected as far as I can tell. So I'll go ahead and get started with just our normal background to get us oriented here. It's about, let's see, it is 9:02 a.m. on September 12th, 2023. I'm hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is officially the second day of phase 3 of the hearing in the court reference proceeding in the case of City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar, Monterey County Superior Court case number 20CB001387. As I described yesterday, this hearing is being conducted by Zoom web conference and is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. Both the audio and video are being recorded, and we will post files of that recording and the Zoom-generated transcript to the AHO FTP site. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. Once again, if you're experiencing technical difficulties today, please send an email to the AHO at admin.hrgoffice@waterboards.ca.gov. AHO staff are monitoring that inbox and can let me know. Assisting me today are several staff of the Administrative Hearings Office. You'll be glad to hear that Nicole Mullen is with us to handle our slides today. We also have Skylar Anderson and Kyle Wooldridge and Regina Graziano from the Office of Research Planning and Performance. As has been the practice, Ms. Mullen will be handling the screen sharing of exhibits and moving forward of slides. So if you are a witness testifying today and you would like Ms. Mullen to advance the slide, please go ahead and ask her directly. Mr. Lilly may have had a different practice there, but if you may feel free to ask Ms. Mullen to advance to the next slide when you're ready during testimony. And for the attorneys, please feel free to address Ms. Mullen directly to bring up a particular exhibit for cross-examination or anything like that. And of course, I will try to assist in any way I can in getting us to the right place at the right time. If at any time I am experiencing technical difficulties during this hearing today, that occasionally happens, hopefully it won't, but occasionally it does. And if I'm not able to rejoin the Zoom conference within a few minutes, one of my staff will call a recess until I'm able to rejoin you. We will take breaks today. I would plan to have a mid-morning break and then a decent lunch break. I try to do at least 45 minutes, if not an hour, so that we all have a chance, especially since we're going all week, we all have a chance to probably do other things. I was going to say rest your brains, but probably do other things. But if you need a break at any time, or particularly to the witnesses, if you need a break at any time, please just let me know. Sometimes I tend to carry on, so please just let me know that you would like a break and we can do that. I am planning to hold the hearing to a hard stop at 5 p.m. We will not go past 5 p.m. no matter what. I know some of you, like me, have childcare obligations and other obligations, so I wanted to give that assurance. So very likely we'll try to wrap up at a convenient time before 5 o'clock so that we don't have to make a kind of awkward break. I did take appearances yesterday, so I think to save time, I'd like to just carry those over. We have expert witnesses for CalAm joining us today, and I know all of you will have a chance to introduce yourselves when you are testifying. But I did want to look to the room and see if there's anyone else who plans on participating today who did not have a chance to introduce themselves or be introduced yesterday. So I'll pause and look to the room.
Ms. Kinsey, for the City of Marina, we have several new participants. Number one, we have Lane Long, who is the city manager of the City of Marina.
Thank you and good morning.
And he will be observing. He's not a witness. And who will probably go on mute and stay on mute and also turn off video. We also have our two experts, Dr. Mark Trudell and Michael Tietze, who are joining today. They're not testifying today, but I wanted to introduce them to you.
Thank you. And good morning, Dr. Trudell and Mr. Tietze. I'm glad you're joining us today.
Good morning.
And thank you for the introduction. And looking to the room, is there anyone else who has not had a chance to introduce themselves or be introduced, who is not a witness who will be testifying today? I think I recognize everyone. All right, with that, I think let's pick up where we left off yesterday. If we all recall, we were discussing CalAM's motion to strike testimony related to certain groundwater flow model and solute transport model input and output files. And I believe we left things with Mr. Osias had some questions and needed an opportunity to speak with Dr. Ye. And so I will turn to you, Mr. Osias, for an update as to where we are this morning, please.
Thank you and good morning. I did consult with Dr. Ye and Mr. Durbin and Mr. Leffler about the model files received Friday night. And as a result of that consultation, we have prepared and uploaded 2 new slides for which the model files were necessary in order to extract the point we wanted to make. They were uploaded 8:33 a.m. this morning. So the upload has 2 parts. One, just the 2 new slides, and then a revised Mr. Durbin slide deck, adding those 2 slides to the end. So you'd have a complete set should you allow them in. They relate to a mistake that we believe Dr. Trudell made, which was revealed by the model files that we received and not revealable before then. So that's, and I think you were searching for some remedy short of striking, which you denied. And so that would be our suggestion, at least for the moment, with a reservation, as you commented on yesterday, that should other things evolve during testimony, the right to raise certain issues again is preserved. But for the moment, and to get started, we have these 2 new slides we'd like to be part of the summary slide deck of Mr. Durbin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Osias. Let me look to my team. I understand these slides were uploaded. They probably, well, let me ask you, Mr. Osias, did you share, when you uploaded the slides, did you share them with the service list as well, or was it just an upload? Which it's fine either way, but I'm trying to figure out whether anyone else has seen.
So it looks like the upload email to you and your staff also attached PDFs of both the 2 slides and the full revised Durbin's summary slide deck. So okay, everyone should have received it at 8:33.
Okay. As I think this through, I'm going to probably put Mr. Brochard on the spot. Well, no, this would be, this is in response to City of Marina. So maybe I'll look to Mr. Spalding or Ms. Meisenheimer first, whether you have any comments on where we are at this point.
Good morning, Ms. Quincy.
Good morning.
We did receive the slides that Mr. Osias mentioned at about 8:30 this morning. We've had a chance to quickly look at them, but not digest them yet. And so while we may not agree with the contents of those slides, we have no objection to them adding the slides. We think that probably resolves the issue. I saw that Mr. Osias wanted a reservation of rights to say something more. We, of course, would reserve our rights to oppose, as I think that given the circumstances here where, they had the original file August 17th, there were some modifications. They were described in our text, and now they've had these files for about 3 days. It does strike me that the ability to add the 2 new slides should resolve the issue. But I understand that there's always a desire by attorneys to reserve rights. And so we just sort of do the correlative and say, if it comes up again, we'll be prepared to discuss it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ms. Meisenheimer. I think with that, I'm not sure, Mr. Osias, if I actually had denied your motion to strike, but I am going to deny it now based on this resolution.
Well, if you hadn't, I would have preferred that you strike it. And I think you knew that.
I understand that. No, I very much understand that, but it sounds like we have a remedy, at least for the time being. So we will go forward. What we'll do is go forward with Mr. Durbin's testimony with the additional slides, with the understanding that those slides have not yet been admitted into the evidentiary record. That's something I do want to talk briefly about the order of proceeding before we get started this morning. And we'll talk about timing of I'm not actually sure what Mr. Lilly has done, but it has been my practice to have a formal offer of all of the exhibits into the evidentiary record. And at that time, if there are any outstanding objections or new objections to admitting those into the record, then I would deal with those at that time. So we have not yet admitted these. If there are other issues that come up once we get through the testimony and cross-examination, there would be another opportunity to address concerns about the slides before they are admitted. So is there anything else on this, Mr. Osias? That
I would just add, as I said at the beginning, that the 3 experts, Mr. Durbin, Dr. Ye, and Mr. Loeffler, have worked together. They don't work for the same firms, but they've worked together on this for a long time. And so it may occur, although there's no new slides, Dr. Ye may have a comment on the 2 slides. I don't mean to limit who can speak to them, but we didn't think we needed to upload them 3 times or to 3 sets of summary slides. So and Mr. Durbin's going first, and we'll see what happens. And then, so that would be my only other comment.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Osias. So I think with that, let's move to the order of proceeding. You gave me a hint here, Mr. Osias, which my first question was going to be, my understanding is that Cal-Am has 3 witnesses today, and I wanted to ask you what order you intended to. Sounds like you don't intend to present them in the order in which their testimony was numbered, which I suspected, but maybe you can clarify for me. It sounds like Mr. Durbin is first, and then how do you see us proceeding?
Yes, and then I'll be sharing these comments with my colleague, Mr. Betts. So, but the simple question is, we would intend to proceed Mr. Durbin, Mr. Loeffler, and then Dr. Ye.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Kunze, if I could follow up on that, a pleasant good morning to everyone and to you.
Good morning.
Our thought was to proceed the same manner in which we have with Mr. Lilly in the last 2 proceedings, and that is, as Mr. Osias has indicated, we will be proceeding with Mr. Durbin, Mr. Loeffler, Dr. Ye, back to back to back. Our understanding is then the AHO would ask questions, and then there would be cross-examination. As it relates to timing, we understand the 45-minute rule, and we intend to abide by that. And we've strived very hard in the past, in the last 2 hearings, to stick with that, and we really have. In fact, in one of the hearings, I think we had only 5 minutes to put on a witness, and we stuck with that, and I know that you'll enforce those rules both ways. Having said that, also with past practice, Mr. Lilly has allowed us or the parties to share time, so to speak. So here, we anticipate Mr. Durbin will go 35 minutes. Mr. Loeffler will then use the other 10 minutes that Mr. Durbin otherwise had. So for a total of 55 minutes, and I believe Dr. Ye is on track for 45 minutes. And I think that was the practice in prior proceedings with Dr. Kincaid and or Ms. Nelson. So full disclosure, that isn't how we intend to proceed today.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. That fits with what I had understood was the practice in this proceeding. And also, just so you know, it's been my typically in my proceedings, I allow a kind of a sharing of the time for a party's witnesses. So that all makes sense to me, and I think that's appropriate. Thank you. And thank you for the clarification as to how you see this proceeding. I see it proceeding in the same way, but I wanted to make sure we were all clear. I realized we hadn't stepped through that that explicitly. I think just so you know, I mean, my understanding is I know I appreciate the 45 minutes. I also appreciate that if there are interruptions with questions, those things tend to go longer. And I will also say I'm more likely to sit and listen. And Mr. Lilly was a little more active in stopping and asking questions. So this may proceed a little more directly today than what may have happened in the past. The AHO, I did ask my team to be ready after the direct testimony to be ready to ask questions if we have any. Of course, we reserve our own rights to ask questions later. It may be after cross that we have more questions. It just as a practical matter. So, you know, we get lucky us, we get the last. It's not the last word, actually. We'll have a chance to follow up. So what I envision is that your witnesses will all together, as you described, you know, kind of back to back, provide their testimony. If the AHO team has questions, we will ask those. I would then intend to turn to, my guess would be Marina Coast first for cross. Mr. Burchard, does that fit the past practice or fit your understanding?
The crosses, there hasn't really been a set order between
Okay.
Marina Coast and the city. I think Ms. Meisenheimer was going to start with the cross on Mr. Durbin, and then I was going to follow.
It actually doesn't matter to me which order you do it in. Just as long as you're clear amongst yourselves, that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we would go to cross in the order as you see fit. My understanding is that cross-examination has occurred, what I would describe as a panel that, for example, Ms. Meisenheimer, you would ask questions of all three witnesses all at once, if you will. And then we would turn to Mr. Burchard for your cross. Is that a correct understanding is it a correct understanding of how things have gone in the past and also how you would like to proceed to this week?
Sure. I think things have been a little more fluid in that while they are sitting on a panel often during cross-examination, and there is some sort of folks jumping in on various issues, we have really proceeded on a witness by witness basis as we've done the cross-exam. And so, for example, you know, Mr. Durbin has a series of exhibits and materials he's prepared. And so I would start by asking him questions about his materials, and then Mr. Burchard would generally follow up with his questions for Mr. Durbin. And then we would pivot to the other experts.
Okay.
Having said that, there may be times that a question is posed to Mr. Durbin, but in truth, Mr. Leffler or Dr. Ye may have the better answer.
Right. Which is the benefit of having the so-called panel. I mean, it does mean,
Correct.
and I appreciate this, that your witnesses are all on standby at one time. It
Correct.
takes more of their time, but it's quite helpful. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Betts.
And I guess I'm not sure what Ms. Meisenheimer meant, but I believe, although I had to admit the other day, I've forgotten more than I remember nowadays at my age, but that like the city exhausted their cross-examination time if they went first, and then MCWD would exhaust theirs rather than zigzagging, 20 minutes here, then 20 minutes for another party, and then 20 minutes back. I thought they went party by party with their cross. In either order, I agree, didn't make any difference. Is that?
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
think
sure I
what might
follow.
be the
Well, I'm just
Okay,
saying,
let me-
if Ms. Meisenheimer starts cross, she should finish her cross of all witnesses. And then MCWD should cross all their witnesses rather than breaking it up
Back and forth.
back and forth.
I understand now. Ms. Meisenheimer, please go ahead.
I think that this is a fluid proceeding, and given sort of the nature of the questions, it can depend. What I would propose is that perhaps Mr. Burchard and I can confer at that mid-morning break, which we will not be at cross-exam yet, and just provide a proposal, because I think it's fair to ask for some certainty in what to expect, and I think we can provide that.
Thank you. That sounds like a good plan, because you're right. We won't be at cross by our mid-morning break. So Let's plan to do that, and we'll return to this question so that we're all on the same page. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then moving forward, so just to describe the whole process here, so that if we need to confer about anything else over the mid-morning break, we have this. I then envision that the AHO may have follow-up questions after cross-examination. And then typically it's been my practice to ask if there is any redirect for the witnesses based on cross-examination, and then if appropriate, allow for recross based on any redirect. So that is my vision of how we would proceed with Cal-Am's witnesses, and then as we go forward. Are there any other questions or issues we should address now about that order of proceeding? And then I wanted to add, and then once we get through that, then I envision, I think at that time it makes sense to move exhibits into evidence and consider any objections. I realize for Cal-Am, you may have additional exhibits later from cross-examination, and we can deal with those maybe at the end, but I think it's helpful for, when it's fresh in our mind, to deal with those exhibits instead of waiting all entirely till the end of the hearing and on Friday when we're exhausted. So that's usually helpful, and I usually like to do it that way unless anyone thinks there's a reason to do it differently here.
I think that is a very good way of doing it and how we've been doing it in the past. My only request would be if there's any way that Cal-Am can give us a heads up at least a few minutes before they move things into evidence at what they want to move into evidence, so that we can take a quick look at it. And it can be in the afternoon break or whenever that is, so that we're not reacting on the fly to what they want to move into evidence.
Yes, thank you.
Tell you right now that our tentative is to move into evidence all of our phase 3 exhibits that we've uploaded.
And we should, Mr. Osais, what we will do, Ms. Meisenheimer, also just so our record is clear, we'll
number
articulate the exact numbers. Yeah,
Yeah. I
We don't have to-
understand.
we'll
Fair
at least
enough.
range.
But Ms. Meisenheimer knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
And then you didn't say it, Ms. Kinsey, but I assume the style of proceeding would be as Mr. Lilly requested, which is sort of a narrative for the summary of each expert rather than a Q&A under it.
That is, I leave that entirely to you, but that's usually, in my experience, that is more effective. So I appreciate that. I wouldn't say it's a requirement. I also, just as a matter of practice, I think slightly different from Mr. Lilly, what I'll intend to do, I will swear in the witnesses again, just because it's been some time. So we will go through the process of swearing in each witness before they testify. And then I will turn to you to ask the witness to verify the accuracy of their written testimony submission. So I'll look to you to do that and make sure that we get the exhibit number correct. Okay. In some ways, the most important part, the right witness with the right testimony. Are there any other questions that we should address now about the order of proceeding? And of course, things may come up and we'll deal with them. I think with that, Mr. Osais, I will turn to you simply because you're off mute. I think we're ready for Cal-Am to begin the presentation of witnesses. I understand you're going to start with Mr. Durbin.
Correct. And I'm gonna do what you ask, and then I'm gonna quickly go back on mute because I've learned my lesson. So, Mr. Durbin, would you go ahead and raise your right hand so that the hearing officer can swear you in?
And Mr. Durbin, also, I'm going to ask you, you may need your right hand for this. If you go off mute, that would be quite helpful.
And we don't need to swear in the horses in the background.
Okay, I'm here now.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Durbin. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Durbin, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. And please, Mr. Osais, if you would please have your witness verify his written testimony, and then Mr. Durbin, you may proceed with your testimony today.
Thank you. And good morning, Mr. Durbin. Did you prepare what's numbered CalAm 176 entitled Phase 3 Direct Testimony of Mr. Timothy Durbin?
Yes,
And does that testimony reflect your opinions?
it does.
And did you also prepare what's labeled CalAm 179 titled Phase 3 Protective Gradient Technical Memorandum authored by Timothy Durbin?
Yes,
And does that reflect your expert opinion?
it does.
And did you also provide references, some of them in Exhibit 181, some of them in a later exhibit I'll get to in a minute, so that the hearing officer and all parties could have copies of the references that you reference in your testimony and technical memorandum?
I did provide that.
And did you also did you also author CalAm 185 titled Phase 3 Written Rebuttal Testimony of Mr. Timothy Durbin?
I did.
And does that reflect your opinions as well?
Yes,
And did you also author CalAm 186 titled Phase 3 Analysis of Groundwater Pumping within Areas Designated by MCWRA as Seawater Intruded, Technical Memorandum authored by Timothy Durbin?
yes, I did.
And does that reflect your opinions?
Yes,
And did you participate in the creation of CalAm Exhibit 187 titled Phase 3 Joint Expert Rebuttal Report Technical Memorandum authored by Dr. Ye, Mr. Leffler, and Mr. Durbin?
yes, I did.
And it contains both your opinions and the opinions of your colleagues?
It does.
And as to the opinions of your colleagues, do you agree with those opinions?
I do.
And did you also prepare what is labeled CalAm 192 Phase 3 Summary Slides of Mr. Timothy Durbin, and now revised Phase 3 Summary Slides, given the two additions from this morning?
I did.
And do they reflect your opinion?
They do.
And did you also prepare what's known as CalAm 193, which is Tim Durbin Phase 3 Summary Slide References, which includes the reference material you cited to?
I did.
Thank you. That would finish that portion of Mr. Durbin's testimony. And now I would ask you, Mr. Durbin, in whatever fashion is most comfortable, but I assume it would be to bring up your revised summary slides to share with everyone a summary of both your direct and rebuttal testimony, including the TMs that you prepared or participated in preparing as your testimony this morning. Would you like CalAm 192, revised CalAm 192 brought up to the screen?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Revised CalAm 192, please. Sounds like is our presentation.
And Mr. Durbin, you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and perhaps Ms. Mullen, if we could just go to the very last page to make sure it's the revised 192, so it has the last two pages that were added this morning.
Yes.
Yep,
That's the
okay,
last page. That
okay.
is the last page, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Durbin. So what page would you like to start on?
2, please.
Thank you. And then I will let you go ahead and drive, as they say in the vernacular, the slide deck and ask Ms. Mullen to change them as you wish. And please feel free to summarize all of your testimony and opinions within the 35-minute time. I don't know if you wanted to count the foundation for his documents, or we're starting the clock now.
Let's go ahead, and that was a question that came up with my team too. Let's go ahead and start the clock now. We brought up the presentation. We'll start the clock now, and this will apply to everyone fairly.
Yes.
And we'll go forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Durbin, you may proceed.
Well, first of all, my testimony today is going to cover 3 different topics. The first one has to do with pumping, groundwater pumping within the mapped seawater intrusion areas in the northern Salinas Valley. And the second topic is to discuss a little bit about string functions, which is a rebuttal item, and then to talk about protective gradients. So those are the 3 subjects I'll be covering. Next slide, please. So there's been sort of an ongoing thing about whether or not pumping is in fact occurring within the mapped seawater intrusion areas of the northern Salinas Valley. And when I say mapped regions, I mean the areas that have been delineated by the Monterey County Water Resources agencies. And in response to some criticisms by Ms. Nelson and Dr. Kincaid, I went through and did a analysis of the pumping data, and came to the conclusion that there is in fact pumping that occurs within the in those areas in both the 180 and 400-foot aquifers. Well, actually, let's just go to the next slide, and then we'll talk about. So the analysis that I did starts with developing what I call a conceptual model of how seawater intrusion occurs in a heterogeneous groundwater system. By that I mean there's spatial variabilities in hydraulic conductivity and porosity, and those heterogeneous features tend to create complex and transient patterns of seawater intrusion. And in particular, in alluvial systems like this, there's a strong tendency for some particles to move out in front of the rest and create fingers of intrusion, and then and that in turn creates or can create regions which are between the fingers that will have less saline water, but those inner finger areas are transient. Or can be transient for 2 reasons. One is eventually the slower moving particles reach the inner finger area, and will tend to fill it in. And if there are areas that are somewhat isolated with respect to transport from other parts of the groundwater system. One might think that, well, those are places where we could pump less saline groundwater, but that's not the case, because if it's not connected, then it's a finite resource, which means that pumping in that particular area would be temporary until the less saline water was exhausted. Why don't we go? Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. Well, first of all, the map on the three-dimensional diagram on the left-hand side just shows from a particular research paper and how these interfinger areas are created, and which this is one example. And go to the next page. That's another example. And let's go to the next page after that. The pumping data that was used in I think all of the models, both the Marina Coast and CalAm local and regional models, were based on the same groundwater pumping data set that I created. To address this question of whether there was a pumping within these intruded areas, my analysis involved looking at wells for which I had what I would call a complete information, had its location of the well. I knew what screened interval that the well was pumping from. And I also knew, had information on the monthly pumping. And after going through that analysis, I've come to the conclusion that there is in fact pumping in these mapped intruded areas. And they're of two types. One is agricultural pumping, and the other is what appears to be industrial pumping. An example of industrial pumping would be the Cemex wells that are pumping saline water that's used in the sand processing at the Cemex site. If we could skip to slide 8. We have there's been sort of an ongoing thing about something called stream function analysis, which is a simplified analytical way of examining flow paths. And it came up in phase 2, but I noticed in the Dr. Kincaid's phase 3 report that the criticisms of what I did have come up again. And as far as I can tell, he's just repeating his same rebuttal or same criticisms that he had expressed in phase 2. I believe back in phase 2 that what Dr. Kincaid did was incorrect and his criticism was unfounded. And I still have that opinion. And go to slide 10. The little explanation. This is the diagram on the left is from Dr. Kincaid's report, or maybe summary slides. No, it's just from his report. And the thick red line, well, let's start with the green line. The thick green line represents the seawater, hypothetical seawater intrusion position at some time. And then the thick red line represents the seawater intrusion after some time has passed from that initial time. And the orange line is the thick orange line is my depiction of the effect of project pumping on the seawater intrusion front. The red line represents, the thick red line represents what would happen without the project. The orange line is with the project. And then the thin, I guess, red line is the line drawn by Dr. Kincaid. And a feature of that is that part of the line is to the east of what otherwise would happen without the project, and other parts are to the west. And there's a simple sort of explanation of why Dr. Kincaid is incorrect or why it is implausible. And that is that if you imagine we have eastward flow, regional flow in the absence of the project. And then we have radial flow to the project wells, which is westward. And when you combine those two effects, the only result that you can get is to have the seawater intrusion front advance less than it would have with the project than it would than without the project. And there's a little vector diagram that shows that. Let's go to the next slide. So throughout these proceedings, there's been a reference to what Marina Coast and the city of Marina refer to as protective heads. And what they, I think, mean by that is that there are particular heads in the groundwater levels in the groundwater system that if those are in particular elevations that protect their Marina Coast wells from seawater intrusion. I think that that's an incomplete way or insufficient way of looking at what the conditions are and what is needed to protect those wells. And that is what I refer to as protective gradients. So it would be desirable to have groundwater gradients that were, say, westward in the groundwater system, and that certainly would protect the Marina Coast wells. And then there's the question of what the effect of the project would be on those protective gradients, or in general on the gradients within the groundwater system, and either for current conditions or some future conditions. And the general effect is that where gradients are seaward, the effect of the project is to steepen them or have essentially no impact on them. And likewise, if the gradients in the groundwater system are landward or to the east, the effect of the project is to flatten those gradients or to essentially have no impact on those gradients. Dr. Kincaid has a different opinion, and I'll get that to that in a moment. If I could go to slide 14. On slide, I was just checking my time. On slide 14, shows groundwater levels along a profile that is from the proposed project wells at the CEMEX site to the currently operating Marina Coast wells that are inland. And so the horizontal axis is the distance from the slant wells inland, and the vertical scale is the groundwater elevation. And all these lines on here come from the CalM model, and later on I'll be making a few comments on similar lines based on the Marina Coast model. But the green line represents the project or the no project gradients or groundwater elevations along the profile for scenario 1B. So that's the green line. And then the orange line represents the gradient for 3B, which has a project. So the green line, no project, the orange with project. And one of the things that you can see, hopefully on this, is that the drawdown, which is the difference at a particular point between the green and orange line, lessens as you move eastward. And just mathematically, that means that the slopes for the orange line are flatter than the slopes of the green line. And I think just examining this, you can see that how those slopes differ. Let's go to slide 20. This is the previous slides that we skipped over represent various scenarios, and again, these are all along this profile from the slant wells to the MCWD wells. And this is and there's also various slides that represent different aquifers or important aquifers in the groundwater system. And this slide 20 is showing profiles along that the west eastward, representing the Dune San aquifer. And one of the things of note here is that the hump in the middle in general represents the perched part of the Dune San aquifer, and there's it shows essentially no difference between the project and with project. Again, the green line is without project, and the orange line is the with project, and on the hump there, they all fall on top of, all those lines fall on top of one another. If you go to slide 26. Now, this is, again, you're still using the CalM model. And these are, this slide and subsequent ones represent the groundwater levels along a profile that is perpendicular to the coast, and then runs through the Marina Coast well field. And what it shows is, the way I look at this is essentially no effect of the pumping. There's a small counter effect near the coast, but it's very small, and the effects all along the profile are small. And there's a series of these, again, for the CalM model, for different aquifers, different scenarios. And I'm going to skip over those, and I'd like to go to 32. Oh, this is again for scenario B, and it's that profile. It's again the perpendicular profile, and this is for, again, the dunes and aquifer, and it shows all the lines are on top of each other, and there's no difference between the project and no project condition. Let's go to 38. Excuse me. This is a graph. The underlying graph was produced by Dr. Kincaid, and it comes from Marina Coast Exhibit 169 on page 26. And there's 4 lines on here, and the blue lines represent the without project condition, and the orange lines represent the with project condition. The solid lines are taken from the Marina Coast model, and the dashed lines are supplemental lines that have been added by Dr. Kincaid. I think the argument here is, and especially as I read Dr. Trudeau's report, that the gradient, the dashed lines, which are constructed lines, not from the model, represent the gradients that should be considered with respect to protective heads. And obviously they're quite a bit steeper, and than the solid lines, and I'm not sure what they represent. I'm sure we'll later maybe hear some explanation. But the solid lines represent what the transport modeling is based on, as far as the simulation of the movement of saline water within the groundwater system. The dotted lines are nothing you find in the transport model. But again, the solid lines represent what would be the advective driving force with respect to the movement of salinity within the groundwater system. Let's go to the next slide. Let's see. The USGS did back in the 70s quite extensive work regarding the offshore hydrogeology, and it was in support of work that was going on at that time by the California Department of Water Resources and trying to develop an understanding of the seawater intrusion issues. And one of the things that the products that they put out was, or a figure in one of their reports, was the outcrop area of the 180-foot aquifer. So the outcrop is actually offshore. And likewise, the outcrop for the 400-foot aquifer is offshore. And go to the next slide. This is just examples of some of the work products that came out of the USGS. Let's go to the next. Go to 41 also. 41, next. So these last two slides are related to, they did some work determining the thicknesses of the 180-foot aquifer and the 400-foot aquifer. They also did work in establishing the base of the groundwater system. Go to the next slide. The Department of Water Resources, in their report during this period, additionally mapped the offshore outcrop of the 400-foot aquifer. And you can see that delineation on this part of the diagram. The point here on these studies is that quite a bit is known about the offshore hydrogeology, and the second point is that it doesn't appear that it was utilized in the work that was done on the Marina Coast model. If I could go to the next slide. The background diagram, the black lines that represent some of the different aquifers and aquitards, was developed by Dr. Ye's staff, but it's based on the hydrogeologic conceptual model that was developed for the by Marina Coast experts. And you see some vertical black lines, or maybe they're blue, on the right-hand side of the yellow areas. And in developing the Marina Coast model, a choice was made to not extend the aquifers to their outcrop area, and the red line represents the thick red line represents the outcrop areas of the dune sand aquifer and 400-foot aquifer and 180-foot aquifer. But where they terminated the boundaries of their model are all to the east of that. And there's consequences of doing that. But before I get to that, I'd like to go to the next. Oh, let me just say one thing here. The yellow areas are the parts of the aquifer that were not included in the Marina Coast model. And then let's go to the next slide.
Mr. Durbin, I believe you have 5 minutes left, just to give you a heads up.
I'm getting really close. And this figure was created by Dr. Ye or his staff. And the thick blue line shows the truncated boundary of the Marina Coast model. And for the 180-foot aquifer and the 400-foot aquifer, and in general, as far as the far edge of the outcrop, there's 3 or 4 miles of aquifer were eliminated from the model. I might mention in phase 2, and actually phase 1, was controversy about the general extent of the models regarding the south boundary. And as part of the phase 2, it was decided collectively by Marina Coast and the Cal-Am folks to move that boundary about 2 miles southward. But what should have happened with respect to the offshore boundary conditions would have been to align them with the prior work of the DWR and USGS. Let's go to 46. These are a series of, let me just actually make a final comment on the this boundary thing. The effect of the truncating the offshore boundary is to distort the hydraulic conductivities that are derived from the model calibration. And in general, I think the truncated model extent versus the hydrogeologically determined extent is about a factor of 2. And one can go through some fairly simple reasoning and come to the conclusion that the calibrated conductivities would be about half of the true values, and that correspondingly, so we have lower conductivity values than are actually occurring because of the distortion of the boundary condition. And that is, I believe, caused the simulated drawdowns, so the difference in between the green and orange line to be about twice or so those that were simulated with the CalM model, which does have the aquifers extend to their natural outcrop areas. And this is a series of slides here that represent the profiles derived from outputs of the Marina Coast local model and the groundwater these are for profiles that are along this the line from the slant wells to the Marina Coast wells, and in general they look similar to what was derived from the CalM model, except that the space between the lines is larger because of this problem with the boundary conditions. So I'm gonna, there's a whole series of slides that along this profile that represent different aquifers and different scenarios. But I'd like to skip to 58. These are from the profile that is perpendicular to the coast and then through the Marina Coast wells, and they looked similar to the ones that come from the CalM model for that profile. And but the difference between the green and the orange line is much larger here, again due to the boundary condition problem. And that is my testimony.
Mr. Durbin, did you want to touch on the last two slides that were added?
Oh, yes, I forgot those.
If you could do that in 1 minute, I know we're over.
Yeah, go to 71 or 70. Dr. Trudell did some work with the CalM model and did some modifications of it to examine an issue that he was interested in. But there was in the model setup, there's a problem in that the general head boundaries on the landward side are not assigned a concentration, and based on what information I've gotten from Dr. Ye's staff and their examination of the files that were just recently obtained. And that, well, let's go to the next slide real quick. 71. The red arrow, well, first of all, the various arrows represent the inflows and outflows in the groundwater system. And as far as we've discovered so far, all the orange arrows have been treated appropriately. But the red arrows should have been assigned some concentration other than zero to represent the concentration of water that would flow from outside the model and across those boundaries to inside the model, and that wasn't done. Exactly what effect that would have, I don't know, but it's definitely an error in the model setup.
Thank you. And Ms. Kinsey, I think that completes not only his time, but his testimony. I would inform you and your staff that Cal-Am Exhibit 179, PDF page 12, has the profiles of the slant well to well 35 and the coast to well 35, if you wanted to see what lines all those profiles were on. In the interest of time, I won't ask him to describe it.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Asais, I think that actually was going to be my question for Mr. Durbin. So maybe just, well, let's, can we just pull it? Let's go ahead and pull it up.
Okay,
since
so
we
that's,
have-
yeah, that's 179 PDF page 12.
Okay, Cal-Am 179 PDF page 12, and then we can, I can make sure my team, that this is exactly what my team is looking for. Ms. Mullen, if we can, I know it probably will take you a moment, but if we can pull it up, I think it'll be worth our time. And then if we can, that's good, okay.
The bottom orange line, thick orange line is the perpendicular to the coast, and the diagonal orange line is from the well field. One of the things I meant to mention a moment ago was that there's been a lot of discussion about protective heads or protective gradients, but when I examine both the Cal-Am and Marina Coast profiles, I see nothing but gradients that are going landward. So it would appear that neither of the models are simulating some sort of protective head or protective gradient near the coast. It's always been a little unclear to me exactly where and what the protective heads were supposed to be, but I don't see them in the profiles.
Thank you, Mr. Durbin. And thank you again, Mr. Asais, for this reference. I think this was exactly what my team was going to ask me to ask. So
Okay,
very helpful. Thank you. I think at this point, we are at, what time are we at? 10:14. I think because we're going to switch witnesses, it makes sense to take a short break. Ms. Meisenheimer, I know you're going to work out some cross-exam issues. I mean, realistically, I think you'll also have the lunch break to work on that question as well. So I will not hold you to having an answer after this break. But let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break because I think Mr. Leffler, as I understand, will be next, and it's looking at approximately 55 minutes. Let's take a 10-minute break and reconvene. I'll round it out. Let's reconvene at 10:25, and we'll pick up with Mr. Leffler.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think I see Mr. Osias and I see Mr. Leffler, so let's go ahead and get started.
That's the key. I did get a text message from Mr. Durbin that he was now having internet connection issues. We've got to get those fixed, obviously, before he's crossed. So he may come or go as that happens. And I'll get a report.
I'm back.
Oh, he's back. Okay.
I see a tile, so good.
Okay. Sorry for that.
That's okay, thank you.
And Mr. Leffler's here. Okay, good.
I see Mr. Leffler, yes. So I think we're ready. If unless you have anything else to add, Mr. Osias, I'll go ahead and swear in Mr. Leffler.
Nope.
Mr. Leffler, you are ahead of me or off mute. If you would please raise your right hand. Mr. Leffler, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. And I think I failed to say good morning. Also, good morning, Mr.
Good
Leffler.
morning.
Thank you for joining us. I jumped right in. With that, I will turn this over to you, Mr. Osias, to start with verifying the written testimony, and then we will bring up Mr. Leffler's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Leffler, and good morning to you. CalAm 172 is titled CalAm Variable Density Model Files. We will not be looking at those because there's only a few of you on this screen who would be able to understand what the heck the symbols mean. But they were delivered by, and because of their size, by FedEx and Messenger to both the parties and the AHO. And you are the source for those model files, is that correct?
Yes.
And to the extent there were changes to the Montgomery and Associates variable density model, you are the team leader for doing those model changes?
Yes.
And they were done in your shop?
Yes.
Okay, to use a vernacular. Okay. And then CalAm 175 is titled Phase 3 Direct Testimony of Mr. Peter Leffler. Did you prepare that testimony?
Yes.
And does it reflect your opinions?
Yes.
And CalAm 177 with a long title called Phase 3 Technical Memorandum, RAY, Solute Transport, Particle Tracking, Drawdown Contours, and Response to Issues Raised in July 26, 2023, Post-Hearing Order, authored by Dr. Ye and Mr. Leffler. You are a joint author of CalAm 177?
That is correct.
And the opinions in it are yours,
Yes.
as well as Dr. Ye's, correct?
Correct.
And then CalAm 178, titled Phase 3 Variable Density Technical Memorandum, authored by Mr. Peter Leffler. You're the author of that exhibit,
Yes.
and that contains your opinions about the variable density model.
Yes.
Excuse me. CalAm Exhibit 180, titled Phase 3 Forkboard Extraction and Injection Technical Memorandum, authored by Mr. Leffler and others. Are you the primary author of that exhibit?
Yes.
And it contains your opinions.
Yes.
There's a collective reference exhibit, CalAm 181, for all the references in everyone's direct testimony. You contributed to that reference with respect to the references that you utilized, correct?
Correct.
CalAm 184, titled Phase 3 Written Rebuttal Testimony of Mr. Peter Leffler. Did you prepare that rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
And it contains your opinions?
Yes, it does.
CalAm 187, titled Phase 3 Joint Expert Rebuttal Report, Technical Memorandum authored by Dr. Ye, Mr. Leffler, and Mr. Durbin. You are the Mr. Leffler who is a co-author, correct?
Correct.
And it contains your opinions.
Yes, it does.
And to the extent it contains opinions of others, you've endorsed or adopted those opinions.
Correct.
CalAm exhibit number 191, which was revised pursuant to some status conferences we had on Thursday and Friday, is titled Phase 3 Summary Slides of Mr. Peter Leffler. You participated in both the revision and the revised set that's now exhibit 192. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
191.
Yes.
Okay, and they reflect your opinions.
Yes.
And that's all I have with respect to that, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Osias and Mr. Leffler. Mr. Leffler or Mr. Osias, would you please identify the presentation exhibit number again for me, and then Ms. Mullen
Yes.
can pull it up. She may be
It
ready.
is,
ready.
it is CalAm, it's revised CalAm 191.
Revised 191.
Thank
So
you.
we will
And
go ahead and bring that up, and then I will turn things over to you, Mr. Leffler.
Okay. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to slide 9 and start with kind of some bigger picture overview items. Okay, so we've done a lot of analysis now, and what we find is that the project doesn't increase the risk of injury beyond some speculative conceptual claims to the basin or MCWD wells. And really many of these claims are purely speculation or not based on modeling results or analyses that were done. And also, really, you could come up with almost an infinite number of speculative scenarios, such as scenario D, in attempts to find one that would show project impacts. I mean, in fact, Sigma will be implemented, but we don't know how. And so, one of the things I like to emphasize is we really focus on scenario B, because that's the existing condition. That's what we know. And we just don't know exactly how Sigma will be implemented. So those are more speculative. Next slide. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, what are the answers we're getting from the model? This consensus model approach we've been working on since January. So first there on the list is that the TDS increases we're seeing are really only occurring where TDS is already high. So there's been sort of this pivot from the other experts to alternative speculative scenarios of what happens if the project stops after some number of years. The second item is that the TDS reductions result from positive impacts of the capture of inland flowing seawater and slowing seawater intrusion. So right now, through that width that constitutes the capture zone, there's inflowing seawater that's going into the basin. And we've quantified that. And once the slant wells are operating, that ocean water would no longer be going beyond the capture zone into the basin. And on the other hand, the MCWD Marina experts claim that these TDS improvements that occur behind the capture zone and around it are not due to the reduction in inflowing seawater, but rather some induced vertical flow of fresh water from the dune sand aquifer into the lower aquifers. That is just not true. That is not true. We've quantified that. That is a very minuscule amount of water that's following that path. And that's documented in our report. Number 3 is that the project causes no harm to MCWD wells by drawdown or TDS changes. And so there's a claim that, there's been this claim about the protective heads, sort of this conceptual speculative claim that protective heads are reduced, therefore there has to be an impact on MCWD wells. That is just not the case. We've not found that with any quantitative analysis. Number 4 is that the project has no impact on storage in any aquifer from which the wells extract. And there's a lot of discussion on, but there's loss of storage from the dune sand aquifer, an aquifer that's not developed for water supply and never will be. Okay, I'd like to go to the next slide. So if we take a step back and a little bit about the history of the criticisms, there's been a lot of work done going back to the EIR. And, one of the claims starting back then and continuing to now is that, we didn't consider potential future Sigma implementation and the impacts. Well, that's been done now. And we find that, regardless of the Sigma implementation, there's no project impacts. Number 2 there is that there was a failure in the previous work in the superposition model to include recharge. But in fact, as we've demonstrated in phase 1, that recharge was already included in determining the gradient conditions. So when you add more recharge, that's just that's incorrect, and that subsequently would change the gradients that you had already determined. Number 3 is that it was brought up in phase 1 that we weren't considering variable density, and that's going to change the answer. Well, we've worked on that, and we've demonstrated that that's not going to change the answers. There was also previous criticism that we weren't using a transient model, that superposition model wasn't transient. So we had constructed a transient model in phase 1, and those results were consistent with the superposition model and the current model. And then finally on the list is that the model domain is too small or too close to MCWD wells, and we've addressed that issue in this phase. One other item not on the list I would point out is that there was previous criticism of the hydraulic conductivity values in the perch mounted aquifer overlying the FOSVA as being too low. In fact, the range that we had previously from 2 to 25 feet per day is similar to what MCWD and Marina have in their own model right now at about 7.5 feet per day. So a lot of the historical criticisms have now been resolved. With that, I'd like to go to slide 28. So, both models that have been developed now confirm that there's no impacts, TDS impacts on existing wells. What we find is that, and that this is, particularly true of MCWD production wells, but also other wells. And what we find is that there's beneficial, neutral, or negligible impacts. And so in the subsequent slides, we have one for each aquifer. It will show that the deep aquifer is pretty much no changes, as you would expect. The 400-foot aquifer changes are negligible in wells that have high salinity, and neutral or improved in lower salinity wells. A lower 180, neutral or improved TDS, and as well as for the upper 180 with negligible neutral changes. Okay, so if you go to the next slide. So this is for the deep aquifer, and I won't spend a lot of time on these because I think Dr. Ye may talk a little bit more about them, but just quickly, the color of the dots represents the salinity or TDS that you would have in the 1B scenario. And then the number that you see there is the change in TDS in milligrams per liter with the project implemented. So this is the deep aquifer. You can see, basically 0 changes for the most part. Next slide. This is the 400-foot aquifer that
Mr.
has.
Leffler, let me suggest that Ms. Mullen just zoom in a little bit so the numbers are more visible. Sorry to interrupt, but just at least one more check. Yeah, that's good.
And so this is a 400-foot aquifer, and so the red, orange, yellow are high salinity locations where you see maybe changes that might be in order of a couple hundred milligrams per liter, both plus and minus. But those are on top of very high salinity values. And then the green and blue you can see are very small changes in lower salinity areas. And by the way, I should point out that the CalAm models on the left-hand side and the MCWD model on the right-hand side. Next slide. So this is for the lower 180, and you can see that there actually aren't many wells very close or within the seawater intruded area here, and they're negligible or generally negative changes. I would note one thing again: the MCWD model doesn't have many wells at all screened in this layer. It seems that one thing I'd point out is that when we have construction information, we know that a well is screened in multiple aquifers. We have pumping from multiple aquifers. As I understand, in their model, they just assign one aquifer per well, regardless of whether it's screened across multiple aquifers. So there's also some differences in the layering. So that's why we have some discrepancies here between the two models and just the number of wells in each aquifer. Next. And this is the upper 180, similar, there's no significant impacts to wells. So I'd like, let's go to 33, next slide. So again, confirming that there's no TDS impacts and that where you do see, some changes in TDS concentrations of maybe, a couple hundred, those are in areas with already saline water from legacy intrusion. So with that, I'd like to go to slide 36. So the next couple of slides, just, these are just a couple examples of what I think is misleading pictures and graphics in terms of the color shading. So here it's from Dr. Trudell's testimony. It says the differential TDS map shows a large area extending more than 2 miles inland where TDS concentrations are predicted to increase by 500 to 5,000. And then there's some discussion of MCWD 12 here and what's happening around MCWD 12, which, by the way, is an inactive deep aquifer well, but it's sort of just for reference, I think. But you can see that in scenario 1B, you already have very high concentrations of TDS in this area of 10 to 20,000. And then, areas even greater than 20,000. And so basically the change in TDS that you see there is, which varies from negative to maybe 5,000, is already on top of a base of very high salinity water. So in viewing these maps, a change in TDS, it's really important to look at what's the underlying concentration. All right, next slide. So in this slide, it says that references MCWD 160 slide 9, and that the non-pumping conditions shows that fresh water in shades of blue in the DSA. Well, if you look at the shades of blue, it goes up to 9 or 10,000 milligrams per liter TDS. I mean, that is a lot of non-fresh water that are in shades of blue. So, it's a little bit misleading in terms of, just the color shading here. All right, I'd like to go to slide 39. So the variable density model work that I was involved in, so first of all, to back up, this type of work was requested back in phase 1 because it was brought up by MCWD Marina experts that we weren't considering variable density in our models, and that might, we don't know what that might mean, and that might change the answers. So Mr. Lilly asked for, some analysis of this issue, whether it be modeling or analytical calculations. And so we've done some work on this, and, we find that the model results for the key questions that are being asked here, such as what's the TDS at MCWD wells, what's going on with the extent of the seawater intrusion front, and to a lesser degree, maybe ocean water percentage, that whether we're using a variable density model or not is not impacting the answers to those questions. And so that's really what we have demonstrated here with this work. If we could go to the next slide. And so importantly, this is not intended as a substitute or a replacement for the WBSSM models, which was claimed by, I believe it was Ms. Nelson. So this work is supplementary to that work. And so its main purpose was to demonstrate that if we do account for variable density, as I said, it doesn't change the model results or the answers to the key questions in this proceeding. And, as a secondary purpose, if you look at those results, it's very similar to the results we get from the WBSSM model. So and previous models. And so it's not, it's not a substitute, not a replacement. This is supplementary work. And I would further point out that in some of the criticisms of this model, Mr. Tietz's rebuttal testimony, the main issue he raises is the aspect of the hydrogeologic conceptual model relating to the extension of the FOSVA to the ocean. And he makes several claims based on that somehow invalidates this work, or he goes to the extent of saying that means the model doesn't even simulate variable density. That is completely inaccurate. That is not true. It does simulate variable density. And furthermore, he's provided no evidence whatsoever that small change, remember, in their model, they already have the FOSVA close to the eastern boundary of the CMEX property already. So the fact that it's extended to the shoreline, he provides no evidence that will make any difference in these model results. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide. So one of the things, so these hydrographs that you see here represent various monitoring wells, CalAm monitoring wells, screened in the shallow zone in the dune sand aquifer. And these plots were provided in that variable density model TM with one exception. So the blue circles are observed data, and then the red and the green lines represent the variable density model results from the original version and the sensitivity run updated version. And then the yellow circles represent model output from the Monterey Subbasin GSP groundwater flow model that Ms. Nelson had created. And so what I want to point out here is that if you read that GSP and the model documentation, it's stated that model is well calibrated as a whole and within individual model layers. So in their view, that model's well calibrated. On the other hand, they say that the variable density model is very poorly calibrated. But if you look at the Dunsand aquifer from the shoreline to about 4 miles inland where MW6S is located, you can see that there's a large offset in those yellow dots from the Monterey Subbasin GSP model to the actual observed data, typically on the order of 30 feet or so. So that, and in fact, if you look at that, it sometimes puts you above ground surface with your water levels. So it seems to some extent that there's a characterization of model calibration that sort of depends on whether it's their model or someone else's model. And this is also important in terms of the discussion of sustainable yield analysis, which relies on that Monterey Subbasin GSP model, and which is frankly inconsistent with their WBSSN model. So with that, I'd like to go to slide 48. So one of the issues raised by in the last proceeding, or at the end of the last phase, I should say, related to changes in groundwater storage and sustainability of Monterey Subbasin. And so in terms of groundwater storage, this table is showing groundwater storage loss, excluding the zone of seawater intrusion in both models, which is shown there in to be less than 700 acre feet in Monterey Subbasin. And I would point out that in their analysis, they did not exclude the zone of seawater intrusion or high salinity, which I believe is an incorrect way of representing that. In fact, in the GSP, the Monterey Subbasin GSP, they exclude the zone of seawater intrusion in their calculation of groundwater storage volume. So I would like to point out that it's important that we get the correct area that doesn't include that zone. And so the model results demonstrate neutral to beneficial impacts in existing production wells and aquifers associated with these production wells relative to salinity and seawater intrusion. So I'll go to the next slide. And this is just a more comprehensive summary of that, and all the different scenarios and the different basins. And so the total is less than 2,300 for all scenarios and all basins, and less than 600 in Monterey Subbasin. And it's, in the GSP, there's a calculated storage volume of fresh water from greater than 1.5 million acre feet to 3 million acre feet. And so this change we're talking about here of 600 is less than 0.05% of that total storage. Okay, next slide. So there's no basis for concluding any impacts from the project that it's affecting sustainability of Monterey Subbasin. Now, we've provided a detailed zone water budget so you can see how the flows change, both within the zone of seawater intrusion and outside the capture zone, and then outside the zone of seawater intrusion. And so if we could go to the next slide. So the bottom line from this analysis is that if you look at the aquifers where wells are screened, the net increase in outflows from Monterey Subbasin to the 18400 is 24 acre feet from the lower 180 foot aquifer to the deep. So that includes the 400.
Again, Mr. Leffler, could we have the slide expanded so that the numbers and the image are visible or more visible? because it's tracking three different numbers, which you might explain. Over here in the legend, you can see it now.
Yeah, so I guess I'll point to that orange arrow that is outside the zone of seawater intrusion and along that purple dashed line, where the top line is 10,312, the next is 10,288, and then there's the 24. So that represents the flow in scenario 1B, 3B, and then the difference between the two. So that's where the 24 comes from. And then similarly, this diagram provides changes in flows, for different portions and different segments. So if we could go back to the bullets. So the beneficial uses of water are limited to non-existent within the zone of seawater intrusion that has salinity that exceeds the respective MCLs. So for example, if you're starting at 15,000 and you increase it 1,000 to 16,000 milligrams per liter, that would not represent an impact to beneficial use. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, there's no basis for concluding impacts from the project on sustainability. In fact, according to the Monterey Subbasin GSP, the Sustainable Management Criteria, or SMC, that drive basin management and tell you whether you're staying within sustainable yield are all based on avoiding expansion of the zone of seawater intrusion. And so the claims that the project impacts from the proposed project to the basin's sustainable yield or ability to meet its sustainability goal, there's really no evidence provided that is in fact the case. And if there were, it would need to relate to the 6 sustainable management criteria that are outlined and defined in the GSP. And again, the model results demonstrate neutral to beneficial impacts to existing production wells and aquifers near these production wells relative to salinity and seawater intrusion. Okay, next slide. So the next series of slides relates to the question regarding flow from the DSA or what we refer to as the perch mounded aquifer that overlies the FOSVA and then flows into the upper 180 and 400 foot aquifer, which also relates to one of the issues that came up in the slides from MCWD Marina experts in the previous phase of work. And so one of those slides shows that you have fresh water in the dune sand aquifer in the upper 180, extending from the shoreline to some distance inland. But in fact, if you look at actual field data, which this diagram provides on the left, from the monitoring wells screened in the different zones, those numbers that you see there are TDS concentrations in green. And what you will see is that there's high salinity from the shoreline extending inland. And really, I mean, all aquifers shown here, the dune sand aquifer, the upper lower 180 and the 400. So the idea that there's this fresh water west of the edge of the FOSVA in the dune sand aquifer in the upper 180 is just not true. And it's not limited to the CMEX area. You can look further to the south of the CMEX property, such as where MCWD's office and facilities are located near the shoreline. And you can look at historical water quality data that also demonstrate high salinity in the dune sand in the upper 180. So we can go to the next slide. So the purple contours in this map represent the TDS contours presented by MCWD and Marina in their testimony for the dune sand aquifer. And while it considers the data from in the CMEX area from the monitoring wells, you can see that it's sort of isolated to that area, and then those contours kind of don't extend further south. But in fact, you can look at data and even their own AEM profiles that show that that is not accurate. In fact, where the red arrow there is pointing to the red diamonds, there's historical water quality data from wells there that show very high salinity, exceeding 30,000. So in fact, that 10,000 TDS contour should extend further to the south. And furthermore, the red arrows and then the red bar that kind of connects at the end of the arrows, as those are from AEM profiles that show that there's high salinity in the dune sand aquifer, at least to that point inland, because they don't extend beyond that. And lastly, I'd like to point out that although we've sort of mutually agreed to not account for freshwater equivalent heads in our current models, that in fact the driving head for inland flow is greater than the 3 feet that's cited in that datum. So there's a driving head that forces water inland in these aquifers related to density and if you convert to equivalent freshwater head. Next slide. So this is a similar figure, but for the upper 180. And again, it's the same issue, that there's data to show very high salinity near the coast, and then AEM data to show that it extends some distance inland greater than what is shown here. And again, those contours should, similar to the CMEX area, should extend further south. And the little inset figure from their exhibit 165, that shows that they claim to have monitoring well data that show this low salinity in these contours, but there isn't. There's no data or wells in that area that they have to define those contours as being much closer to the shoreline. I'd like to go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're sort of shifting a little bit to one of the zone budget analyses that we did. And this is a very important one. This is in the yellow area in the inset diagram. Well, first of all, the purple area in the inset diagram is the outline of the capture zone. And then the yellow area.
Let me pause you for just a second, Mr. Leffler. Ms. Mullen, I think we can zoom in and still keep most of the slide here. Others may have the advantage of a larger screen, but this one is particularly small for me. Okay, maybe one more. Can we do one more? Perfect. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Leffler. Please go ahead.
No, thank you for that. So the zone budget, it looks at the flows coming in and out of that yellow area. And so basically what it shows is that, as I mentioned earlier, if you were to look at this area without project pumping, within that width of the purple and the yellow areas, you have inflowing seawater at a rate of, or ocean water, at a rate of 750 acre feet per year. So that is occurring now. That is occurring without the project. If you turn the slant wells on, that water will then be captured and will not flow inland beyond the purple area. And so that's what these figures, and in the report we have a series of figures for the different aquifers. But that's what these figures show in our report, is that, and that is key to this, and that is why you see decreased concentrations in TDS around this area, because you're reducing the inland flow of seawater. And so that's just, the bottom line in terms of, what is the benefit of this project.
Mr. Leffler, please explain the 3 stack numbers in the boxes again, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, okay. So again, this is for scenario 1B in the upper line, and scenario 3B in the blue, and then in the black is scenario 1B scenario 3B minus 1B. And so if a flow is negative, that means it's leaving that box or that zone budget box. So you can see that the number is, and this is just for the upper 180 foot aquifer. So this is not for all the aquifers. But at the edge, so you can see the -1334. So that's the flow going inland without project pumping. Then the minus looks like 921 is the flow going inland with the project pumping. And so the reduction in inland flow for this aquifer is 413. And so we have the 750 comes from the addition of that number with other underlying aquifers.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion about the U-turn of flow. So once the water in the perched mounted aquifer that sits on top of the FOSVA flows over the edge of the FOSVA and then turns around and flows inland. And it's a false premise that this provides fresh water to any inland wells. In fact, what happens is that water in the perched mounted aquifer that has lower salinity, as soon as it drops over the edge of the FOSVA, it's dropping into saline water. And so it becomes saline. It mixes with that saline water, and then it flows inland. So there really is no fresh water flowing inland. There's not a separate pot of fresh water that's flowing inland. It mixes with the saline water in that coastal dune sand aquifer as soon as it flows over the edge of the FOSVA, then migrates down vertically into the upper 180 and flows inland as saline water. So in the next series of slides, it shows this in different ways with different models. And you will see how it's flowing into these higher salinity areas. So let's maybe go to the next slide. So this is an example from, I believe it's Mr. Trudell's exhibit from the solute transport model output for TDS concentrations. And again, what it's showing is a couple things. One is, and again, please keep in mind the blue shading issue that I mentioned previously. But what you can see is at the edge of and maybe it would help to zoom in on this as well. So their edge of the FOSVA is between MW7 and MW4. And so you can
Ms. Mullen,
see.
I'm sorry, can we go in one more so I can see I think I know where MW7 is, but it's a guess. There we go. I have terrible eyes, just so everyone knows, I'll admit. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Leffler, I can see it now.
Okay. And so first of all, like if we say maybe we focus at the MW7 area at the very top, and you see the arrows that are pointing to the left, so flowing towards the ocean. And then you can see as it gets to the edge of their FOSVA, how it flows over the edge. You can see that arrow that's pointing down. And you can see how as soon as you go over the edge, you're going into those higher TDS waters. And then by the time it's has U-turned and flowing back inland, it's already in saline water. So there is no fresh water that's turning around and flowing inland. So with that, maybe we go to the next slide. So this again, this is just showing more modeling. Yeah, thank you. More modeling results from a slide from Mr. Trudell's testimony. And this is again scenario B conditions with the arrows and showing the flow. You know, from that upper perch mounted aquifer flowing into the saline water at the edge of the FOSVA. Okay, we go to the next slide. And so this is a modeling showing modeling results again from the TDS concentrations profile at the edge of the FOSVA, scenario 1B from the MCWD model. And so they point out the western edge of the FOSVA, which you can see there. And so again, you can sort of, actually, if we could maybe zoom in one more. So you see where it's MW7D, you see that arrow, that white arrow that's pointing to the left, right at the edge of the FOSVA. And so you can see it's going from blue to green. So you're already exceeding 1,000 milligrams per liter in the green, and then it goes into the yellow where it's exceeding 5,000. Okay, let's go to the next slide. It's just more of the same. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this gets back to, you know, what was raised in the previous phase, at the end of the previous phase, where we were asked to address this issue that was raised in MCWD Exhibit 160, slide 10. And so what you see in slide 9 on the left-hand side is this, you know, false conceptual diagram showing the blue, which, you know, implies fresh water in the dune sand aquifer all the way to the shoreline, as well as in the underlying upper 180. And this is supposed to be happening without the project, which we've already demonstrated. Without the project, this is a very saline area in the dune sand in the upper 180. And then the diagram on the right-hand side purports to show what would happen with project pumping. Well, this is just, it's a faulty premise because slide 9 is incorrect. You don't have the slide 9 condition as your starting condition. In fact, the starting condition is even worse than what's shown in slide 10 because the dune sand aquifer is more intruded than, more saline than what's shown here. Okay, next slide. So again, it's just, you know, more of the same as far as this issue. However, this one is located further south because there was a claim that that diagram wasn't meant to represent what's happening at the CMEX property on rebuttal by the MCWD Marina experts. They said, well, no, that's, you know, that's supposed to be further south. So this is a profile further to the south with their model. And again, if we want to zoom in a little bit there where it says western edge of the FOSVA. And you can see again in the blue, then goes to green, then goes to yellow. So again, as soon as it goes over the edge of the FOSVA, it's going into saline waters that already exists there. So you know, it's the same condition further south. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. So the modeling results regarding this you know, shallow freshwater issue and what may migrate vertically, there was a claim that there's this 460 acre feet of additional vertical flow. But the bottom line is that that 97% of this additional downward flow is occurring in an already highly saline area. So that's, sort of throwing out a number and not putting it in its proper context of where this is happening. And so that's what we found in our analysis when we looked at this. All right, so I think I would like, no, I'll go to the next slide. Sorry, slide 65. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about so let me just doing a time check here. Recharge issue. So first of all, MCWD Marina overestimates recharge on two issues. One is they did this USGS soil moisture balance that uses DayMet data instead of PRISM data. And the difference in that precipitation is shown in the top lines with the blue. The dark blue line is the DayMet data. And you can see the precipitation amounts on the y-axis on the left. And the light gray is the PRISM data. So you can see the difference in how much more 2 to 3 inches in the wetter years, when frankly most of the recharge occurs, is occurring. That's the discrepancy between these data sets. And there was really no reason for them to even do this analysis. They had already done a soil water balance analysis in the Monterey Subbasin GSP using PRISM data. And of course, they've got lower estimates of recharge from that analysis than they did from this new one using the DayMet data. So there's really no reason to do this additional analysis that uses this PRISM data. And furthermore, that instead of just using that as a set input to their steady state model, they still had recharge as a calibration variable, and they increased it even more. So that's the basis for their scenario A recharge in their calibrated model. And furthermore, they did not adjust that for scenario B as was the intent to represent the longer term average conditions in the lower groundwater elevations. Mr. Trudell stated that they calibrated to these lower levels from 2009 to 2021. They did not do that. So scenario A recharge, and this really is south of the Salinas River in the Dune Sand Complex area. Their scenario A their scenario B is the same as scenario A in terms of the recharge. And so that also actually applies to their scenario C and D, that there was no adjustment for the predictive scenarios for recharge. Okay, next slide. So there was also a statement that in rebuttal that, there's no saying whether the DayMet data set is worse than the PRISM data set. Well, first and foremost is the PRISM data set that's what everybody uses. I mean, they used it themselves in the Monterey Subbasin GSP. So, I mean, the PRISM data is become sort of the gold standard for precipitation data. And that's what pretty much everyone uses. But for additional proof, you could look to this journal article, which compared 5 different precipitation data sets and found that the PRISM data set was the most accurate. Go to the next slide. So in terms of our work in our original model runs, as this issue's come up before, there was a misinterpretation of the Durbin soil water balance output that resulted in a higher recharge input to our model than what had been intended. So in the phase 3 direct testimony, we provided a series of sensitivity runs where we just changed the recharge to better align with the output from Mr. Durbin's work. And so you look at that, and there's a series of figures that show the seawater intrusion front from both model runs and both recharge estimates. And what you will find is that there's very little difference actually in terms of the ultimate impact of different recharge numbers in these models. In terms of the key questions, again, that are being asked, TDS impacts at MCWD wells, extent of seawater intrusion front, and again, to a secondary extent, ocean water percentage. It's really the only scenario where you see much difference at all is in scenario D, which we'll talk about here shortly. And furthermore, the fact that we overestimated the recharge, our recharge estimate was very similar to our scenario A, very similar to what MCWD and Marina had used as input for recharge. And from the criticism that, oh, somehow our model's not valid now that we said this is an overestimate is just wrong. That model is just fine. We're still using that model, and its output is perfectly valid. It's just we're supplementing it with these sensitivity runs, and we're noting that it really only makes a difference for the scenario D. All right, next slide. So this is an example of that output from that direct testimony and the recharge sensitivity run for 1D and 3D in the lower 180-foot aquifer. And essentially what you can see there is that the seawater intrusion front, both with and without slant well pumping, is effectively the same. All right, next slide. This slide just shows the recharge amounts in the original and the recharge sensitivity runs. And there's not much difference north of or outside the dune sand complex. The main difference is within the dune sand complex. Okay, next slide. So when we have these in our original run with the overestimated recharge, you can see the differences there in the yellow and the green lines, where that green line with project pumping extends a little bit further inland in the Monterey subbasin. But you can see that, as labeled in red, that's an undevelopable area in terms of any future pumping. These orange dots represent the MCWD Marina abandoned wells that they had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the purple dots are Fort Ord abandoned wells. If you pump there, you're going to pull in seawater intrusion. So you cannot pump in that area. You cannot develop that area. It's currently seawater intruded due to that former pumping by those wells. And if you somehow pulled that seawater intrusion front back there, that you still would not be able to develop that. All right, next slide. And this just shows the, in the sensitivity run, that essentially you have similar seawater intrusion fronts with and without pumping in the Monterey subbasin there. All right, next slide. So just quickly on this is the Fort Ord injection extraction issue. We checked that out in detail. We checked the calibration. We basically found that it makes no difference. We included the extraction and the injection. They're just pumping from one area, injecting in another area. So it really makes no difference as far as this model is concerned. And with that, what I'd like to do with my remaining couple minutes is I'd like to go back to Mr. Durbin's slides, if I could. And specifically, I believe it's slide 43.
So that's 192, CalAm 192.
Thank you, Mr. Osias.
Mr. Leffler, what slide did you want to see?
I believe it's slide 43. Yes. Okay, so this issue that Mr. Durbin described is maybe the biggest, or certainly one of the biggest differences between our two models. Our model represents the interface between ocean and aquifer, where it actually occurs physically on the seabed, as represented in part by these red bars on this diagram. So that is where ocean water is flowing into the aquifer system, in these sediments beneath the seabed. That is physically what's happening. There was no reason to change that. That was already in the model. They created more work for themselves to do it differently. There's no reason to do that. And the way that they've done it here, as described by Mr. Durbin, is not the physical reality. You do not have constant heads at these blue bar locations. And those constant heads extend vertically through the aquifer as they're representing it. And that's going to distort all your model results. We haven't had an opportunity to fully figure out how this affects their model results entirely. But one example would be their calibration to the test slant wall drawdown is affected by that dune sand aquifer constant head boundary being so close to the shoreline, or right at the shoreline, because if you pump right next to a constant head boundary, you're going to limit the drawdown. And so that allowed them to calibrate to a much lower K value in the dune sand aquifer than actually exists in reality. And so this is a major difference in our models. I think it's a fundamental flaw in their models, and has an impact on both their calibration and how much seawater intrusion you simulate. I don't understand why they made this change. It was completely unnecessary. And furthermore, they used it as a calibration parameter. They actually moved the boundary around to try to help calibrate the model. So it's just a fundamental flaw in their model. And it just shouldn't have been done that way. So with that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Lester.
Mr. Loeffler. And I think we were right on the dot on that time estimate.
I think you were very close, and we also had a little bit of zooming that had to be done, so that helped too. I don't think at this point I am going to have questions, but I'm probably going to need a moment to digest, so I'm going to maybe save it until after our next witness, because I think it makes sense to go ahead and power through, given that it's 11:28, to go ahead and turn to Dr. Ye, unless you have a different suggestion, Mr. Osias. Does that sound good to you, that we would continue on?
Yes, and you're intending to let Dr. Ye finish, not split him up at the lunch break? 45 minutes would
Yes,
take.
no, the intent would be, yes, to do it all at once. I don't want to split it. I'm trying to avoid splitting anyone up.
Yeah, okay. So I need to go back to my list of exhibits, and we need to get Dr. Ye to turn on his microphone and raise his right hand for you.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Loeffler. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So you would like to swear the witness now?
Yes, I do. I'm looking at my own. Thank you. Dr. Ye, thank you. First of all, good morning. It's still morning, and thank you for joining us. If you would please raise your right hand. Dr. Ye, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Please proceed, Mr. Osias.
Thank you, and good morning, Dr. Ye.
Morning.
Let me start with the exhibits that you had your fingerprints on. There is CalAm exhibit number 173 titled CalAm Phase 3 Solute Transport Model Files. Are you a primary contributor to the development of those model files?
Yes.
And they reflect your professional opinion as to a properly constructed model?
Yes.
CalAm 174 is titled Phase 3 Direct Testimony of Dr. Johnson Ye. Did you prepare that testimony?
Yes,
And it reflects your opinions?
yes,
CalAm Exhibit 177 titled Phase 3 Technical Memorandum, Ray Solute Transport, Particle Tracking, Drawdown Contours, and Response to Issues Raised in July 26, 2023 Post-Hearing Order, authored by Dr. Ye and Mr. Leffler. You're the Dr. Ye who co-authored that exhibit,
yes,
and it reflects your opinions as well as Mr. Leffler's,
yes,
and you adopt Mr. Leffler's opinions as your own from that
yes,
testimony.
yes,
Thank you. CalAm 181 contains references from all the direct testimony of you, Mr. Leffler, and Mr. Durbin, and you've contributed those direct testimony references to CalAm Exhibit 181.
yes,
CalAm 182 entitled RWSE Flow Model Scenario Files. Are you familiar with that?
yes,
And are you the primary model file creator for that exhibit?
yes,
And it reflects your professional opinion as to a proper model.
yes,
CalAm Exhibit 183 is entitled Phase 3 Written Rebuttal Testimony of Dr. Johnson Ye. Did you prepare that testimony?
yes,
And it reflects your opinions?
yes,
CalAm Exhibit 187 entitled Phase 3 Joint Expert Rebuttal Report Technical Memorandum, authored by Dr. Ye, Mr. Leffler, and Mr. Durbin. You are the Dr. Ye who's a co-author of that report,
yes,
and it expresses your opinions, correct?
correct,
And your opinion includes the opinions offered by Mr. Leffler and Mr. Durbin in that report.
yes,
CalAm 188, revised to remove a certain number of files, is entitled CalAm Phase 3 Rebuttal Model Files. You are the primary author of those model files, correct?
yes,
And as revised, they reflect your opinion about a proper model.
yes,
CalAm Exhibit 190 entitled Phase 3 Summary Slides of Dr. Johnson Ye. Did you prepare those summary slides?
yes,
And they reflect your opinion.
yes,
And would you like to start your testimony with CalAm 190?
yes,
Thank you. If we could have that brought up. And CalAm 190 is revised. I'm not mentioning revised all the time, but we're not using anything but the revised exhibits.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Osias. And here we are.
And so, Dr. Ye, this is your summary slide deck, and you have 45 minutes to share your opinions with the hearing officer and her staff.
Okay, good morning, Ms. Kenzie. I will start with my major opinions first. Please go to slide number 3. Yeah, would you please zoom in slightly? Okay, first of all, both MCWD and the KLM Saru transform models show no TDS impacts in MCWD wells from the project. The model simulated TDS concentration in MCWD wells under project condition, minus the model simulated TDS concentration under no project conditions, is summarized in the upper table for MCWD model and the lower table for KLM model. As you can see from these tables, these values range from -4 to 0, indicating a small decrease to no change in TDS concentration under project conditions. It's very important to know the upper table was generated by KLM experts using the model files provided by the MCWD. MCWD Marina experts do not provide model simulated TDS in MCWD wells using their model. Next slide. So we have 4 panels here. Upper left is the model simulated TDS contours for lower 180 feet aquifer for scenario 1B, with the seawater intrusion front shown in solid purple. Upper right panel is the TDS contours for the scenario 3B, with the seawater intrusion front shown in dashed blue. Lower left panel is the differences in TDS due to project pumping, and the lower right panel is the differences in TDS for area outside the seawater intrusion front. As shown in the lower right-hand panel, 3B minus 1B produce little change in TDS. Modeling results from recharge sensitivity runs for 1B and 3B show even less change. In summary, project would not cause TDS impacts to 180 to 400 subbasin. MCWD Marina experts do not distinguish between increase in TDS in areas of already high salinity from increase in TDS in areas with low TDS. Next slide. These are similar panels as shown in previous slide, but for 400-foot aquifer. Solid transport modeling conducted by KLM experts for predicted scenarios demonstrate negligible to beneficial impacts to the extent of the seawater intrusion front in Monterey subbasin for scenario B and the C conditions, and for scenario D conditions with lower recharge sensitivity run. Therefore, project will not cause TDS impact to Monterey subbasin. Next slide. MCWD Marina experts provide no analysis of a groundwater storage loss that subtracts out non-freshwater TDS zone. Groundwater storage loss for the Monterey subbasin was calculated to be less than 700 acre-feet. This is less than 0.05% of the total volume of a fresh groundwater storage, ranging from 1.5 million to 3 million acre-feet, estimated by the Monterey subbasin GSP. Therefore, project will not cause groundwater storage loss to any aquifers utilized by any MCWD wells. Next slide.
This one may need blowing up a little bit, Dr. Ye.
Yes, please. Yeah. Okay, thank you. KLM experts conduct a water balance analysis for scenario 1B and the 3B for the area between the capture zone and the western boundary of the FOSVA for the Dongsan aquifer, upper 180-foot aquifer, and the lower 180-foot aquifer. This is one example of the water balance for the upper 180-foot aquifer. MCWD Marina experts conduct lots of particle tracking, but do not provide any quantitative calculation using their model. So based on our water budget analysis, the purged aquifer groundwater flowing over western boundary of FOSVA mixed with the saline water before migrating downward to 180-foot aquifer. Therefore, project will not capture fresh water otherwise usable by others. Next slide. Yeah, would you please zoom in slightly? Yeah, in addition to compare seawater intrusion under with without project condition, KLM experts also conduct water balance analysis for the area of a decreasing TDS for scenarios 1B and 3B for the Dongsan aquifer, upper 180-foot aquifer, and the lower 180-foot aquifer. Results also show project provides a net benefits to inland flowing due to reduction in net ocean inflow under project condition. Again, each of the boxes show 3 numbers. The upper number is no project condition 1B. Middle number is the under project condition for 3B. Then the black number is the differences. So therefore, a project will impede, not enhance seawater intrusion. Okay, would you please jump to slide number 12? To modify the scenario 3B runs were made that consider the delivery of return water to the Castroville area to be used in lieu of groundwater pumping based on the ocean water percentage of sandwell feed water. The 2 scenarios we conducted include 6% return water and 9% return water. The return water delivery significantly reduced drawdown at distance from the stand wells and raised groundwater elevation in Castroville area due to in lieu recharge. Next slide. The return water into recharge would further minimize TDS impact to the 400-foot aquifer, as shown in the lower left-hand panel, a significant area with green, indicating a decrease in TDS under project conditions. Would you please jump to slide number 17? MCWD Marina experts conduct a solute transport model calibration. However, this model calibration inadequate use steady state flow model calibration period from 2019 to 2021 to calibrate the TDS concentration for a period from 2015 to 2018. The hydrological periods for the flow model and the solute transport model are totally different. MCWD Marina experts exclude the period of discontinuous test well pumping from April 2015 to October 2015. This makes comparison of a model calculated to observe the TDS in sand well misleading, since pumping during the early period affect the observed TDS concentration around the test well. Also, 900-day calibration period is not long enough, which makes results of a calibration exercise highly dependent on assumed initial concentration and largely irrelevant. Next slide. Also, initial TDS concentration for the deep aquifer used for the model calibration are extremely low, essentially zero, and unrealistic when compared to monitoring well data. MCWD solute transfer model calibration use ocean water TDS of 33,500 milligram per liter for the Cmax percolation pond inflow, even though field data is available, which documents lower salinity well water used in washing sand that subsequently flow into the percolation pond and reduce overall TDS concentration to be approximately 28,000 milligram per liter. KLM experts rerun the solute transfer model calibration with the correct TDS concentration for Cmax percolation pond inflow. Results show the model would underestimate the TDS concentration from test well. The MCWD solute transfer model calibration relies on output from the MCWD calibrated flow model provided on June 12th. As pointed out previously, there are several serious issues with the flow model, including, next slide. Can you go back to previous slide? Yeah, so this flow model issues, including it does not converge and therefore does not meet industry standard. There are very high residuals at NW1 well, underestimation of drawdown by 3.81 feet for an observed drawdown of 6.95 feet in the NW1 middle, about 55% underestimation. Also, based on review of the modeling file, we notice there are 12 pumping cells used for the test stem well, represent 3 vertical wells, which is inconsistent with the specified stem well configuration. These flaws impact the solute transfer model calibration and should be seriously considered when evaluating results from the MCWD solute transfer model. Next slide. Dr. Trudell used the KLM flow model to conduct an evaluation of a solute transfer model calibration. However, the calibration files created by Dr. Trudell were not provided on August 30. KLM experts received the model files on September 8th, 9 days after the due date. Also, the scenario recharge B was used for this analysis. but this scenario represents the average hydrology for the period from 2009 to 2021, not hydraulic condition represented during the test well pumping test, nor the hydrology used for the flow model calibration. So Dr. Trudell put this figure with the 3 different lines, but each of these lines represent a different hydrology. So I don't know how can you put this together to compare. Dr. Trudell's analysis also incorporate incorrect assumption, result in overestimation of a test well TDS. This incorrect assumption include initial TDS concentration were based on 2019 to 2021 data. They are much higher than pre-test well observed TDS. As shown in the chart, you can see that's the reason the yellow, the orange dots at the beginning of the model simulation is much higher than the observed data. Also, TDS concentration for Cmax population pond inflow is too high. Dr. Trudell assumed 32,759 milligram per liter, but KOM believe it should be 28,000 milligram per liter based on the observed data. In addition, the flow model of a B scenario used by Dr. Trudell generates much higher water level at the boundary condition, result in steeper inland hydraulic gradient as compared to A scenario, which was used by MCWD for their solute transport model calibration. Next slide. So for MCWD solute transport model predicted scenarios, the incorrect low TDS concentration of 29,800 milligram per liter was assigned for the Dunsan aquifer offshore constant head boundary. And it is not consistent with observed offshore seawater concentration of 33,500 milligram per liter. MCWD Marina experts assume TDS concentration of 29,800 milligram per liter for offshore Dunsan aquifer constant head boundary, with a supporting rationale that this lower value represents a brackish mixture of fresh water and seawater in the offshore portion of the Dunsan aquifer. But these areas of Dunsan aquifer are temporary and transient, and once slant wells start pumping, any lower initial concentration in feed water from the offshore constant boundary would quickly be replaced by highly salinity water from the ocean. In addition, initial TDS concentration for the predicted scenario run for the deep aquifer are extremely low used by MCWD, pretty much less than 50 milligram per liter for majority of the model area. So this is not realistic when compared to monitoring data. As a result, MCWD model simulate average TDS concentration for the 4 MCWD deep wells range from 2 milligram per liter to 27 milligram per liter. MCWD Marina experts do not provide any model simulated TDS concentration for the deep aquifer in their results. Next slide. since the solute transfer model relies on the flow model output, it's very important to have a quick review of the flow models developed by the KLM experts and the MCWD Marina experts. As shown in the table here, the KLM model steady-state calibration statistics are generally better than MCWD model. In particularly, the KLM model has a steady-state relative error for all wells of 3.2% compared to a relative error of 4.8% for the revised MCWD model as shown in the table. Also, the KLM model has a relative errors for each model layers below 15%. The revised MCWD model, however, has extremely high relative errors for the upper 180-foot aquifer and the deep aquifer. As you can see here, 18% and 20% respectively. MCWD Marina experts are continually changing their flow model. So MCWD Marina experts submit a calibrated steady-state flow model on June 1st, submit a revised calibrated steady-state model on June 12th, then submit a scenarios flow model June 16th with different general head boundary compared to the June 12th calibrated model. Then for the phase 3 proceeding, Dr. Kincaid appears to use another flow model for his particle tracking. This flow model runs were not provided to KLM or the AHO. Next slide. So MCWD flow model also contains modeling issues and the fundamental flaws, including ocean boundary head representation, as Mr. Left talked about previously. Flow model calibration underestimates drawdown in KLM monitoring wells, for example, NW1. Steady-state calibration of a higher than average groundwater elevation using unrepresentative recharge, not adjust to scenario A recharge to create a scenario B, C, and D as directed by AHO. Calibrate vertical stem well pumping distribution were not used for the predicted scenarios run. Also, MCWD assume a very low vertical hydraulic conductivity for the SVA, and the SVA was extended to an area where SVA doesn't exist. The flow conceptual model leads to water levels above land surface simulated by the model in the area north of the Salinas River. These issues were inadequately addressed by MCWD Marina experts by double counting ET from the shallow depth and restricting recharge from the streambed population. As a result, a reduction of total recharge of 15,000 acre-feet per year. Even with these incorrect adjustments, the high water level issues are still unfixed. Next slide. One of the most important solute transfer model parameters is the effective porosity. MCWD Marina inadequately use constant effective porosity of 0.2 for all model layers, including both aquifers and aquitars. KLM used effective porosity of 0.1 to 0.15 for aquifers and 0.04 for aquitars to reflect the hydrogeological conceptual model and the hydraulic properties of the sediments. Also, these values are consistent with the previous solute transport model calibration conducted in 2008, 2015, and 2022 for the North Marina groundwater model. MCWD Marina TDS concentration assumption of a 29,800 milligram per liter for the Dionsen aquifer offshore constant head boundary is incorrectly low, and it's not consistent with the observed offshore seawater concentration of 33,500 milligram per liter. It's also not correct for steady state condition. MCWD Marina initial TDS concentration for the deep aquifer, this is for the predicted model scenarios, are extremely low, less than 50 milligram per liter for majority of the area. MCWD solute model is based on underlying flow model, which are major concerns as discussed in the previous slide. So in summary, KM solute transport model is a better model than MCWD model. Can you jump to slide 25? Yeah, MCWD attributes areas showing reduction in TDS concentration due to project pumping to be result of a vertical freshwater flow from the Dionsen aquifer to underlying seawater intrusive aquifer. MCWD Marina experts do not provide any quantitative analysis to support this statement. So we did the water balance for the area shown in purple. Results of the zone water budget analysis using the MCWD model reveal that the reduction in TDS is driven by the reduced seawater intrusion caused by the interception of the inflow by stem well pumping. So this is a water balance analysis using an MCWD model. Next slide. So we also did the water budget analysis using a KLM model. Results of this water budget analysis also reveal that the reduction in TDS is driven by the reduced seawater intrusion caused by the interception of ocean inflow by stem well pumping. Would you please jump to slide number 29? Would you please zoom in slide? Okay, thank you. This is a figure showing model calculated change in TDS between 3B and 1B for the deep aquifer by KLM model on the left and by MCWD model on the right. Each well for the 400 for the deep aquifer is identified with color code. It's to the scenario 1B TDS concentration. Each well also identifies the model change in TDS as shown in the number under scenario 3B. Impact on TDS at each location is either improved, neutral, or negligible. improve or beneficial means the TDS declined at that well location under 3B project conditions. Neutral means the TDS did not change at that well location under 3B project condition. Negligible means the TDS increased, but it's compared to the scenario 1B TDS, it's a insignificant amount.
Dr. Ye, before you move on, there's some square wells on these, a few on this aquifer versus the circles. Do you want to point out what that means? You'll see in the legend.
Yeah, so those square represent the MCWD wells. So as you can see, deep aquifers show almost no change in TDS everywhere. Okay, next slide. This is a similar figure showing model calculated change in TDS for the 400-foot aquifer. Existing wells identify both the west and the east of the seawater intrusion front. It's identified in scenario 1B. Again, it's shown 400-foot aquifer has negligible change in wells with scenario 1B TDS over 10,000 milligram per liter, and mostly over 20,000 milligram per liter TDS, and the neutral or improved TDS in the rest area. Next slide. This is for lower 180-foot aquifer. Again, it's shown lower 180-foot aquifer has neutral or improved the TDS in all wells. Next slide. This is for upper 180-foot aquifer. So upper 180-foot aquifer has a few negligible change and predominantly neutral or improved the TDS at all wells. Next slide. So in summary, impacts on the TDS at each well location is either beneficial, neutral, or negligible. Impact on TDS at each location is identified for each aquifer area, showing increase in TDS concentration from project pumping primarily occur in area within the seawater intrusion front that are already highly saline from existing seawater intrusion and do not represent the groundwater source that are usable for other aquifer. Also, increase in TDS concentration and the migration of the seawater intrusion front south of the capture zone are minor, generally restricted to the undeveloped area and are not anticipated to affect beneficial use. Next slide. The MCWD model underestimates ocean water percentage due to incorrect assignment of a TDS concentration to the Dunsan aquifer offshore constant head boundary. It's shown in the upper row of the table, ranging from 85 to 89 for the ocean water percentage. KLM experts reran MCWD model with correct assumption of ocean water concentration and the model estimates of ocean water percentage are presented in the lower row of the table. As you can see, ocean water percentage was estimated to be 92% for 3D and 98% for scenario 2C and 3C. Please jump to slide number 39. This is about variable density model and the non-variable density model. Sensitivity runs were made to quantify differences in model calculate groundwater elevation and the TDS concentration between a variable density model of the area and the non-variable density model. The CMIX model was used for this analysis. The CMIX model was developed in 2015 by Geoscience, was rerun with ModFlow and the MT3D. The CMIX model is a more localized, higher resolution model located within the North Marina groundwater model domain and the center at the CMIX site. It was constructed using the variable density model CWAT computer code. The CMIX model run 3N was rerun using the non-variable density model computer codes, including ModFlow for the flow model and the MT3D for the solid transport model. As you can see from this figure, in general, ModFlow yields very similar results for the groundwater elevation compared to CWAT. The differences in groundwater elevation between the CWAT and the ModFlow run is less than 1 foot. Next slide. As shown in the left panel for the Dunsan aquifer and the right-hand panel for the 180-foot aquifer, MT3D also yields a very similar TDS results compared to CWAT. The minor differences between the ModFlow MT3D and the CWAT model runs indicate that the model is not sensitive to the use of a non-variable density model or variable density model for the purpose of evaluating potential impacts of a stem well pumping on groundwater elevation or TDS concentration. Next slide. These figures are particle tracking and the particle movement from KLM model under 1B conditions. The left panel 1B and the 3B conditions for the on the right panel. As you can see, they are generally very similar and do not show any project impact. This is especially true on either side of the stem well capture zone. Behind the capture zone, there are less particles moving in them, indicating a benefit from project pumping. Its ocean inflow is intercepted by the stem well pumping.
Dr. Ye, before you go on, maybe we could blow that up and you could explain why the particle tracks have different colors.
Yeah, each of the color indicating the particle trapping in different model layers. As you can see the aging right here. Can you zoom in a little bit more? That like the orange color, that's indicates the 400-foot aquifer.
So when it changes from green to blue to orange, that's showing where the particle is in which aquifer?
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Next slide. So Dr. Kincaid conducted 4 particle tracking runs from the shoreline under scenario 3B and the 3D conditions. However, particles were only released south of the capture zone and do not provide any indication of the movement of ocean inflow in the other coastal reach as requested by the AHO. In addition, no scenarios run under no project pumping conditions were provided for comparison. That make the evaluation of a project impacts meaningless, and it's very misleading. Dr. Trudell also does not provide particle tracking under no project conditions for comparison. In addition, Dr. Kincaid did not indicate what layer the wells show on each figure were screened, making it very difficult to assess potential project impacts to existing wells. So CalM experts rerun the MCWD particle tracking under no project condition. You can see show on the left-hand side to generate points for comparison. So it's shown the particle tracks and the particle movement south of the capture zone are very similar under no project condition compared to a project condition and do not show any project impacts. Furthermore, none of the particle tracks show particles from the shoreline traveling to active MCWD wells with without project. Next slide.
Dr. Ye, you have only a few minutes left.
Okay, so it's very important to note that there are differences between particle tracking results presented by Dr. Kincaid for phase 3 and the particle tracking results simulated by CalM experts using flow model output from MCWD model scenarios run submitted for phase 2. These differences indicate 3B and the 3D particle tracking figures and the model files submitted by Dr. Kincaid for phase 3 use a different groundwater flow model. Next slide. So to better understand where inflow from coast is going, water budget analysis was conducted for the 3 separate zones under scenario 1B and the scenario 3B conditions. This is a water budget analysis for the northern zone, zone 1, representing the area between 1 and 2 miles inland from the coast and the ridge north of the capture zone. Results show a very small net increase, approximately 196 acre-feet in eastward inland flow of water with stem well pumping compared to without stem well pumping condition. Next slide. This is a water budget analysis for the zone 2, representing the area between 1 and 2 miles inland from the shoreline for the capture zone. Results show net reduction of ocean water flowing inland to the east of 523 acre-feet per year under stem well pumping condition compared to no stem well pumping condition. Next slide. Then this is a water budget analysis for zone 3, representing the area between 1 and 2 miles inland from the shoreline and the ridge south of a capture zone. Results show also a net decrease in eastward inland flow of ocean water about 38 acre-feet per year with stem well pumping condition compared to no stem well pumping condition. So the total net decrease in eastward inland flow can be calculated as 561 acre-feet per year for capture zone, plus 38 acre-feet per year for south of the capture zone, and minus 196 acre-feet for north of the capture zone. As a result, it's approximately a net decrease of 365 acre-feet per year. So that's conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ye.
Thank you, Dr. Ye, as well from me. I'll ask the question this way, Mr. Osias. Does this conclude CalAM's presentation of the summaries of direct testimony of your witnesses for phase 3?
Yes.
Thank you. I think we all are ready for a lunch break, I'm sure, but before we break, I wanted to turn to Ms. Meisenheimer. I don't know if you wanted to talk. I realized maybe it would be helpful to talk before the break. I'm not sure about how you want to do cross. We can do it now or later. It's entirely up to you. What would you prefer?
We'd prefer to talk about it right after the lunch break, if that's all right.
That is fine with me. I just wanted to make sure you didn't need some instruction before we break. Let's go ahead. I do like to take a good lunch break, in part because I need to eat lunch, but also it gives me a chance to digest some of this. So I think I would like to break until 1:30. That will give us just a little over an hour. But is there anything we should talk about before we take our break? And when we return, I'm sorry, I should clarify, and this has always been the case, but you will need to log out of Zoom, or you will, I think, be kicked out of Zoom, and we will re-log in. It's the same link, but it's just part of our recording device. But is there anything else we should talk about before we break? All right, well, thank you so much for powering through this morning, and I will see all of you at 1:30 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.